After going through the report in a little bit more detail, I have a lot more questions now than I have answers, and I think most of you probably do as well. In this video, I have taken some notes, and we're going to go through what looks like at least a dozen different points that are going to lead us back to something that we covered that a lot of people took issue with, and even myself I wasn't sure of, but now I'm leaning more to the idea that there might have been personnel aboard that ship that weren't supposed to be aboard that ship, at least for a certain short amount of time. The reason I say that is because the report states they were in the Sea of Japan heading towards the Philippines, and this location is not on the way. It's on the way from Yokosuka, but why they would have been over there and then turning around, plus it shows that the ship was going nose to nose with the crystal. It was coming allegedly from Yokosuka and not running alongside like the captain of the cargo ship said he was. And it's also in the report that the navigation lights were on. So we can, I know MCON is about signals discipline, but if she's running with navigation lights on, she's not trying to be not seen. She's just running, in a night configuration with red lights in the interior and no external lights other than the navigation ones. So, without any further ado, we are going to go to the report. The first and most important thing in this report, to my mind, is right off the bat. It says here, in reference, I directed additional investigations, blah, 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 following the collision. My review of the additional findings confirmed my original determination that the injuries to the 3 surviving service members and the deaths of the 7 sailors occurred in the line of duty and not due to misconduct. That's a very, very important statement. That means the CO, who was one of the 3 injured, the CSO, who was another one of the injured, and one of the sailors that escaped berthing too, none of them there was any misconduct going on, and the 7 who died clearly were asleep at the time, so no misconduct there as well. But that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. There had been this initial allegation from a lot of people about, oh, somebody was asleep on watch, or somebody was playing cards or not doing their job. In this initial report, there seems to be no finding of misconduct by anyone. Now, I know they have the report of lack of faith to command. That's one thing. Loss of confidence to command. They're separating the 3 senior officers from their positions, command positions, but they're still going to be in the Navy. And non-judicial punishments, where 7 people died, means that something else is going on. But anyway, that's, to me, the biggest thing. Also, it says here that the report only deals with post-collision activities. It's not even designed to or meant to talk about what led up to this and what were the reasons that this happened. And I find that to be very odd as well. After 2 months of people saying, wait for the investigation, wait for the investigation, we get the investigation, and all they're talking about is what happened after, which we pretty much knew. They give details of what happened below decks and the flooding and the reactions of the sailors, and they were heroes. These guys were absolutely the best of the best. That they didn't lose more than 7 is pretty amazing. It shows the heroism and the professionalism of our Navy, and this will be probably the end of my toleration of any statements to the contrary about our sailors, because this proves it. I mean, there were men that stayed down in the water and helped other sailors and cost them their lives. The next point, okay, point 7 down here, we're going to go to where they were talking about, they give you the size of the ship and they show where, and here is 7. And this is where it gets a little confusing with the chart. It says on the morning of 16 June, Fitzgerald departed Yokosuka for routine operations. Fitzgerald began outbound transit to sea from the Sagami-Wan operating area at approximately 2300. That's not in the morning. That's in the evening. By 01:30 on 17 June, Fitzgerald was approximately 56 nautical miles to the southwest of Yokosuka, Japan, near the Aizu Peninsula. Now, I did the best I could to make this where they said it was. You know, there's Yokosuka up here. I drew a line that's almost exactly 56 nautical miles. To be within sight of land, generously granting 30 feet above the waterline at the bridge, you could see about 8 miles. And so that's generally what's going on here, 56 and 64. So here is generally the place where the Navy is saying they were, and it's also showing their direction of travel outbound from Yokosuka, going this way, not running parallel. Like the captain of the ACX Crystal said, running in the same direction as. Morning of said, we were running in the same direction as. But the strange thing in the report, though, is when we look at this, and there's the statement of when the collision occurred at 01:30 and where it was. And also, seas calm, 2 to 4 feet. I had heard 6 feet, but this is even calmer. This shows about condition zebra, basically that they had all of the hatches shut, and somebody had mentioned one of my videos that probably what saved them. It's absolutely right. But then it shows this. It shows the collision being same direction, when we know, and they have these facing the wrong way. I suppose northwest, east, south. We know that the Crystal, if we're going to believe the track, was transiting eastbound, and this shows it being in the same direction would mean that it would be coming, that this would be going east by south, and it shows them going south by west in the report. So still a great deal of confusion. Also, point 10 here, this picture they have of the bulbous bow. Now, it's very hard for me to read, but does that say four-speak tank void? If that's what that says, that void to me means that that bulbous bow would have been an empty shell, meaning that it could have very easily busted off, as we had alleged, with that force of that collision. And that's why we saw the smaller bulbous bow versus the larger one we covered in other videos. Now here's where things get a little odd. We start to see a lot of redactions and a lot of pictures that are just blacked out because of security reasons. We've covered this part. The impact at the moment of the collision caused Fitzgerald to list 14 to port. That would make sense initially, and then settle back 7 degrees to starboard because of the excess water. That makes sense. The collision resulted in a loss of external communications and a loss of power in the forward portion of the ship. It's just amazing that they lost things so quickly, and we'll cover that when we get down to the chart later. But she did change her lighting configuration to red over red, so that means that the crew, the command crew, at least at that point in time, was in command of the bridge and was in the ability to at least let other people out there know what was going on. Berthing 2, it's basically a description of the heroism, but one thing that came up, and more pictures like this, all blacked out. When you get down to the reports of the sailors, some of the sailors who survived the flooding describe a loud noise. Others felt an unusual movement thrown from the racks, but others did not realize what happened. Some slept through it. And that's from the Navy. And then some reported hearing alarms after the collisions. So very strange set of circumstances. You would think that something like this would have pretty much woken everybody up almost immediately. No one would have had to have been pulled out of their bunk. Or rack, sorry. Fell into Army talk there for a minute. It's just very strange that that wouldn't have woken everybody up. Point 35 I thought was worth covering as well. And this goes to what I initially thought when I first heard this story about and this will be the last time I deal with it out of respect for the young man and his father. The flooding of berthing 2 resulted in the deaths of the 7 Fitzgerald sailors. The wrecks of those 7 sailors were located in rows 3 and 4, area closest to the starboard access and egress, and directly in the path of the onrushing water. And it shows later on in the autopsies that the bodies were badly abraded and had contusions all over it. And that's the force of this amount of water coming in would have tossed these guys around like rag dolls, and slammed them into things, and they would have been killed instantly. It's just an incredible amount of force. So that's just the beginning and ending of that. And the last thing I'll say about the kid's dad, I had to do some soul searching. You know, if I had lost one of mine in this manner, and I had been, you know, looking at that last communication and looking at that time, that 2:56 that he said, and then he had seen, you know, that the time reported erroneously by the Navy was 2:20, I might have jumped to that conclusion without thinking as well, too, because you're not in your right mind. So God bless that man, and, you know, his son's a hero and deserves to be in Arlington where he is. So last thing we're going to say about that. All right, 36 and 37, or excuse me, 37, 38. This is where we realized that the CSO was one of the injured, and since he was one of the injured, and none of the injured were being charged with any kind of misconduct, you know, this guy's pretty high up, so he was clearly doing his job, and so was this sailor. He wasn't, and this guy wasn't sleeping, so he was on duty at the time, I would have to assume. He said he was not in a stateroom at the time of the collision, but returned to it and assisted his roommate, so I have to imagine that he was probably on duty, or at least definitely not asleep, for sure. We're going to jump down here to all the way down. Now, this talks about the CO being in his cabin and what they did to get him out of there, and I guess he was in pretty bad shape. Once again, why he would have been there. Boy, you know, how this thing, what they're still alleging here is that nobody saw it until it hit, which is just beyond anything I can imagine. But in point 57, it says, Radio Central was partially flooded as a result of proximity flooding. The crew effectively combated flooding with stuffing tube compound and then dewatered the spaces using buckets and swabs. And main engine 1 had only minor flooding. So how communications got cut immediately with only partial flooding and what seems like not even serious flooding in that area, to me, still remains a mystery. Now it gets down to the response of the Coast Guard. 2 vessels, Izanami and Kano, arrived at 4:52, and from the chart they had dispatched at 0410, so they made about 42-minute transit from where they were to there. But, you know, in that chart it also says that they were, you know, under route at 0218, so that's clearly something else was going on there. Probably, they might have been talking about a helicopter. And, you know, this is about the Dewey. And 87 and 88 will be the last 2 points that I deal with before we go to the chart. Oh, this is the just about the autopsies, that they all died of drowning and that some of the bodies had contusions. You know, initially I thought that might have been an issue, that, you know, perhaps there had been some kind of a struggle aboard, but given the force of the water and what would have happened, that explains that. So anyway, down to the chart, and this is where things get really, really confusing. Starting like with what we talked about yesterday, 0100 Fitz underway, Sea of Japan on the way to Subic Bay, Philippines. Course of 230 degrees at 20 knots. Makes no sense for 90 minutes prior to collision, when they say that she had left 11:30, 30 minutes prior to this from Yokosuka in the report. I don't know if this chart is a misprint or the report is a misprint, but once again, it goes to the Navy. I don't want to brush the Navy as if I'm brushing them as opposed to the Army or the Marines. The military can do a very good job at times, and sometimes they can do a very bad job of attention to detail. So this is going to have to be cleared up by somebody. Collision 0130, 2 minutes after collision, 2-second alarm, no general quarters, which you would think that would be the initial response, that somebody would call general quarters even if they didn't know what the hell happened, which is basically what the Navy is saying, is that out of nowhere there was this collision, they don't know how it happened, and you would call general quarters. But as we can see, that doesn't happen until 15 minutes later, after they've lost all power, which still is, it makes no sense. So this happens at 01:30, collision alarm, and within 5 minutes somebody says, I'm sure somebody says, where's the commanding officer? And they probably realized he was trapped. So that's probably the explanation for that. It is just this is the strangest report I have ever seen. It's haphazard. Some of these times are out of order. Like here, Japanese Coast Guard en route to Fitz location. Coast Guard helicopter, Coast Guard, and this is, like I said, this is 50 minutes after. It's in the 0200, Fitz makes initial report of collision at sea to CDS-15 via personal cell phone at approximately 0220 hours. That must have been what the Navy Admiral was referencing the 3 times in his press conference about that 0220 time, and when they brought up the issue with the 1:30 time, that's probably why he didn't debate it, because he was only going off of that phone call he got from his people. But it's just dang strange that that was 2:20, and the time reported by the Japanese Coast Guard that they received a phone call from the crew of the ACX Crystal was 0225, a full hour later. Given everything that had transpired in between 01:30 and 0225, that's just amazing to me. So that's this is one of my much longer videos, but you can go through here, and this pretty much is a compendium of everything that happened afterward. We waited 2 months to find out what happened before, and there may be another report coming. I don't know. I know the Japanese are done with their report. I was under the impression the Coast Guard had been brought in, U.S. Coast Guard had been brought in to deal with the death investigation. That's what had been reported, but apparently that's being dealt with by the Navy now. Or maybe this is just a report through the Navy from them. So that is pretty much the beginning and ending of the reporting on this. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them at some point to the very best of my ability. But it has left me with a lot of questions. Why the Fitz was there, what she was doing, why was she not in the Sea of Japan when it's reported that she was in the Sea of Japan? Why was this a detour? And why is the thing now saying that she was heading toward the ACX Crystal and not running parallel with her? And how did she end up parallel with her if she was heading toward her? So this is what 2 months of investigation got us. So we're going to continue to ask the questions and see what comes of this. So thank you everyone for the support and your patience in this video. I don't normally do them for 18.5 minutes, but hopefully the powers that be won't cut this one down to 4 minutes like they did my last one. So like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thank you.